Hey, this is Hayden Spencer, just dropping in here at the start of the show to say thank you again to everybody that listens to this show. I am keeping things going and really enjoying learning more about American history, so we'll of course be continuing with our recounting of all 250 years of American history. Working full-time and doing this job as well definitely takes a toll, and so sometimes I am forced to record at odd times. This next episode that you are about to hear I recorded at 3 in the morning before going to work and after coming home from work rather late the night before, still maintaining a house and a life with my wife, so every now and then I probably am going to sound a little tired in the episodes. That's just the way it goes, and this is one of those times. So hopefully it's not a big deal, but I definitely can hear in my own voice just how tired I am. I don't mean to complain because what I'm doing by choice and I really, really enjoy it. So thank you again for all your support and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today we resolve the Missouri Crisis, catch back up with the Long Expedition in the West, and of course there is an election this year. If you are new here, welcome aboard. This show goes year by year through American history, covering all 250 years of this nation. And if you are returning, welcome back. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome to 1820 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and John Adams writes a cheerful message to his daughter Louisa in which an idealistic view of the North is presented and reads, "My dear daughter, compliments of the season, and what is better, prayers that you may enjoy the present year and as many future years as you can endure in health, peace, and competence. I congratulate you on your having your olive plants round about you, though the two collegians have not been dutiful enough to send me a journal of their journey, nor an account of their arrival at their paternal mansion. A residence at Washington must be to them a scene of dissipation, but as they are all in love with books, I hope no temptation will allure them from their first love. This is a region of perfect indifference, insensibility, if not stupidity. There is nothing here to make us angry with one another in all New England. We go on chiseling rocks, weaving cloth, making shoes, building houses and churches of granite, making roads and dams across the sea, eating fat turkeys, roast beef, and Indian pudding, and more than that, mince pies and plum pudding in abundance, besides cranberry tarts. Tell the boys if they do not write me, I will set up pretensions of the authority over them, as a grandfather." Now, in a rare deviation from strictly American stories, on the 27th of January, a Russian Antarctic expedition officially discovers the continent of Antarctica, being the first recorded sighting of the continent, but coincidentally, on January 30th, a British explorer sights the Trinity Peninsula of Antarctica and claims it for Britain. And later in this very year, an American sealer, Nathaniel Palmer, becomes the first American to sight Antarctica on the 17th of November. It's a busy year for Antarctica. News of the discovery, as all news is for now, is slow to travel, so it's most likely that each country believes that they have discovered the continent themselves, and the three nations' extreme southern voyages are merely coincidence. Either way, there will be no settlement on the icy polar landmass until the end of this century, and we'll talk more about land claims much later in the show. On the 15th of February, William Ellery, one of the last of the 5 signers of the Declaration of Independence to still be alive, passes away while reading De Officiis. So let's take a moment and look at the life of Mr. Ellery. He entered college at the age of 16 and graduated in 1747 before entering his father's mercantile business in Newport. About this time, he also became a naval officer of the colony of Rhode Island, and in 1748 he became a master mason in the First Lodge in Boston. During this period of his first marriage to the end of the French and Indian War in 63, Ellery became a clerk of the court, and not only was his handwriting quite excellent for the job, but he gained some knowledge of the practice of law, of writs and deeds and procedure firsthand. He eventually passes the bar and enters the practice of law in 1770. Now, as the colonial disputes with England became more and more intense, Ellery had led a riotous march of Rhode Islanders through Providence in resistance to the Stamp Act in 65, and again helped support efforts against the Intolerable Acts of 67. When the First Continental Congress met in 74, they aroused the admiration of Ellery for the stand that they made in resisting British authority on matters internal to the colonies, and while Ellery was not a member of the First Continental Congress, he knew law and had connections and correspondence with many important people, both in Rhode Island and in the other New England colonies. When actual fighting broke out in April of 75, Ellery became extremely concerned that there was no way to handle the British acts of violence that included accommodation, but that few delegates were espousing such positions. Ellery announced, quote, "You must exert yourself to be ruled by Tories when we may be ruled by Sons of Liberty. How debasing! There is liberty and fire enough. It only requires the application of the bellows. Blow, then, a blast that will shake this country." Around this time, he also let it be known that he would stand for office as a delegate should a vacancy occur, and when Samuel Ward became ill with smallpox, the position presented itself and William Ellery took his seat on the 16th of May in 76. Ellery was present for the reading of Richard Henry Lee's resolution in June and voted for it in July, as well as the Declaration on the 4th. A few days after voting for independence, Ellery wrote to his brother, including the sentence, "We have lived to see a period which a few years ago no human forecast could have imagined. To see these colonies shake off and declare themselves independent of a state which they once gloried to call parent." Ellery was present to sign the engrossed copy of the Declaration on the 2nd of August along with most of the other signers, and he wrote that he was determined to see how they all looked as they signed what might be their death warrant. So he placed himself beside Secretary Charles Thompson and eyed each closely as they affixed their name to the document, and he records that every single member to sign displayed undaunted resolution in every countenance. The anecdote about the joke of the time it will take to die by hanging is sometimes mentioned as having Ellery in the place of Elbridge Gerry. During the Revolution, Ellery served on a committee to help procure clothing for the American Army, and then was placed on a Marine committee, and he went on to sign the Articles of Confederation in 78. For Ellery, as for other members, attending Congress for extended periods of time took a toll on financial resources. Ellery rode on horseback rather than in a carriage, and on one trip home he traveled with John and Samuel Adams. The three of them stayed at an inn, where all they could eat was bread and butter, and he wrote about his traveling experiences, saying, "Had I announced myself as a member of Congress, who would have believed me? Setting aside my spectacles, there is, I'm sure, no dignity in my person or appearance." In 79, William Ellery was a member of the committee to settle some diplomatic problems among the American commissioners in Europe, and continued his service in the Congress until 86, with only a very few brief absences. In 1790, with the organization of the country under the new Constitution, President Washington appointed Ellery as Collector of Customs for the Newport District, a post he retained through all the changes of national administrations until his death. He once wrote a summary of his own life, saying briefly, "I have been a clerk of the court, a quack lawyer, a member of Congress, one of the lords of the Admiralty, a judge, a loan officer, and finally a collector of the customs, and thus, not without great difficulty, but as honestly, thank God, as most men, I have got through the journey of a varied and sometimes anxious life." That varied life catches us up to today, where Ellery, having sired 6 or 17 children, outlived 2 wives, signed the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and served the federal government under 8 administrations and 5 presidents, dies at his home in Newport, Rhode Island at the age of 92. There are now but 4 signers left: Carroll, Adams, Jefferson, and Floyd. Now let's catch up with the situation in Maine, which is right now a district of Massachusetts, as it has been since the late 1600s. As early as 1680, residents of Maine signed a petition seeking a separation from Massachusetts. The 118 petitioners argued that Massachusetts officials obstructed their religious freedoms, the religion being largely Puritans. Starting in 1792, 6 formal attempts called for Maine's statehood. The most common complaints were the distance Mainers had to travel to reach the General Court in Boston, their underrepresentation, taxes, and a law that reduced the price of Maine lumber, allowing Massachusetts to prosper at the expense of Maine. It was on the ballot in 92, 97, 1807, twice in 1816, and finally again last year, in which the vote for separation received the necessary support. It's now up to Congress to admit the state and approve the Constitution, and at first, it seems that Maine's statehood is going to be blocked or at least held hostage while the Missouri state is under consideration. In the District of Maine, a strongly pro-abolitionist group of secessionists actually argues in favor of allowing slavery in Missouri, the other proposed state at the moment, in order to secure statehood for Maine, while also publicly disavowing the practice. A compromise is reached, one supported by Henry Clay, in which Maine is admitted as a free state, with the promise of admitting Missouri as a slave state to preserve a balance in the Senate. Now, another part of this Missouri Compromise is Congress designating the 36-degree and 30-minute parallel as the boundary where no slavery is to be allowed to the north. Missouri is the final exception, joining Kentucky, Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland as states north of the line, but by this year still allow slavery. One other effect of this compromise, though one not formalized, is that states begin being admitted in pairs to maintain sectional balance in the Senate and in the Electoral College. At any rate, by March 15th, it is official, and Maine is the 23rd state. Near the end of April, Congress passes the Land Act of 1820, as it comes to be known, and reduces the price of land in the Northwest Territory and Missouri Territory, encouraging Americans to settle in the West. The cost of land is reduced down to just $1.25 per acre, and the minimum size of tracts is reduced to 80 acres, meaning that with $100 you can have enough to start a small farm. So this is obviously way easier for people of modest means to begin their homestead in the West, but one catch is that with this price reduction comes the abolishment of the ability to purchase on credit, as cash payment is now required upfront at time of sale. Alright, now all that takes us to July 4th, when the 23 American flag becomes the official banner of the United States to represent the admission of 2 new states. Alabama from the end of last year, and Maine, as we just discussed earlier in this year. On the 10th of July, Thomas Bibb is sworn in as the second governor of Alabama, following the death of his brother William Bibb. Now, I was a little interested in how the governor's brother ended up replacing him after he died from falling off his horse without being elected, because generally that's not how that works. So I read the Alabama Constitution, and it stipulates that the governor be replaced by the president of the Senate, which it just so happened was Thomas. Now, if you remember from last year, we discussed the long expedition that ended up being withdrawn for mostly funding reasons and a lack of organization. Congress does, however, reapprove a much smaller scientific exploration of the Great Plains by Stephen Long. So, across this summer, the scientists have been documenting the natural resources and mapping the area through the Great Plains. Long says that he wants all the vegetation, land and water life, and geological formations to be studied and well documented, along with the diseases of animals and insects. Now, in July, we arrive at a story that goes largely overlooked even in my hometown's local history, despite my living in approximately the location this event finds us. Dr. Edwin James, a naturalist enlisted in the expedition, who was personally selected by Major Long, convinces him to wait a couple days at the base of the 14,000-foot mountain that Zebulon Pike recorded trying to climb unsuccessfully nearly 15 years ago. But Dr. Edwin James proves to have better luck, and he and 2 men reach the summit on the afternoon of the second day of their journey and spend only about an hour at the summit before they begin the trip down. I've seen it claimed a couple times that an American flag is placed atop the peak during this summit, including from ushistory.org, but in reading the journals from the expedition have not found that recorded myself, and it kind of has the feeling of an apocryphal story that you inevitably come across when looking into these things. Especially because one of the few places that does mention that a flag is placed on top of the peak here in 1820 also mentions that the flag has 23 stars, which would be pretty unlikely considering when the journey set out. Still, I'd like to believe that James put some iteration of the Star-Spangled Banner up there. Either way, they spend the second night just below the summit, but without blankets or provisions, as they had to lighten their load the day before to speed up their ascent. James and the 2 men returned to Long's encampment on the night of the third day completely exhausted. However, not only did they manage to scale the mountain, they also made many notes in their journal and returned with plenty of examples of previously unknown plants and flowers, including a little blue flower known as the columbine. Impressed with his efforts, Major Long names the mountain for him, declaring that it should be called James Peak. In early August, the 4th United States Census is begun, eventually coming to the count of a population of 9,638,453, of which 1,538,022 are slaves. Again, just to point out for clarity, I've seen in multiple sources the number claimed to be 11 million and some odd, which is simply an error created by adding the slave population a second time to the total, likely under the assumption that the 2 numbers were separate. So, to be clear, there are 8,100,431 free persons at this time, and America is close to, though not quite, at a total population of 10 million. It's remarkable to think that that's actually less than 3% of what it is today. In mid-August, the first eye hospital in the United States opens in New York City. the New York Eye Infirmary. And when I looked into it, I imagined that it'd be relatively rudimentary forms of care, but in fact, there are congenital cataract surgeries going on from this very first year. The first report, that includes just a little over a year, says that 1,120 persons afflicted with diseases of the eye had come through, 801 of whom were deemed cured. Now, you may be wondering why today's cover shows a bunch of bizarre symbols. You may have also seen that it resembles a Latin or Roman alphabet. Well, while I can't actually pin down, and I don't think anyone can, the year that this alphabet first appeared, estimates range between 1820 and 26, so erring on the early side, I've opted to include a story about this sequoia syllabary here. As the story goes, before the development of the Cherokee syllabary sometime in the 1820s, Cherokee was an oral language only. The Cherokee syllabary, or sequoia syllabary, is a set of written symbols invented by Sequoia in the late 1810s or early 1820s to write the Cherokee language. His creation of the syllabary is particularly noteworthy in that he could not previously read any script whatsoever. Sequoia first tried to create a system of writing for the Cherokee language, creating a character for each word. He dedicated a lot of time and effort to the endeavor before eventually coming to the conclusion that there was just too many words to practically remember and write. He then tried creating a symbol for every idea, but this too caused too many problems to be practical. Finally, he arrived at this set of 86 characters in their present form. Many of the characters resemble Roman or Greek letters, even Cyrillic or Arabic numerals, but there's no apparent relationship between their sounds in other languages and in Cherokee. In order to prove out the concept, Sequoia taught his daughter the language. Then, to demonstrate the language in use, would ask somebody from a tribe to say a word, which he would then write down and have his daughter read the word, convincing them that the syllabary was effective. Nearly the entire time that Sequoia was working on his alphabet, and even now as he's trying to demonstrate it, superstition causes some to view what he's doing as witchcraft, but the idea eventually catches on and ends up actually spreading rapidly over the next decade. And while the language is nearly extinct today, it is actually available as a system language on some smartphones. The sharp panic from 1819 is slowly subsiding. The government has been extra frugal recently. The Land Act that we discussed earlier has made farming land more affordable for farmers pushed out of their old lands, and the nail in the coffin for this economic downturn will find us tomorrow. But for now, on the 14th of November, James Monroe makes his State of the Union address to Congress, and while I won't be reading the whole thing, I will be reading just a few paragraphs that are pertinent to the Panic of 1819 and the continued economic downturn that is still ongoing. A few prominent facts will place this great interest in a just light before you. On September 30th of 1815, the funded and floating debt of the United States was estimated at $119,635,558. If to this sum be added the amount of 5% stock subscribed to the Bank of the United States, the amount of Mississippi stock and of the stock which was issued subsequently to that date and as afterwards liquidated, to $158,713,049. On September 30th, 1820, it amounted to $91,993,883, having been reduced in that interval by payments of $66,879,165. During this time, the expenses of the government of the United States were likewise defrayed in every branch of the civil, military, and naval establishments. The public edifices in this city have been rebuilt with considerable additions. Extensive fortifications have been commenced and are in a train of execution. Permanent arsenals and magazines have been erected in various parts of the Union. Our Navy has been considerably augmented, and the ordnance, munitions of war, and stores of the Army and Navy, which were much exhausted during the war, have been replenished. By the discharge of so large a portion of the public debt and the execution of such extensive and important operations in so short a time, a just estimate may be formed of the great extent of our natural resources. The demonstration is the more complete and gratifying when it is recollected that the direct tax and excise were repealed soon after the termination of the late war, and that the revenue applied to these purposes has been derived almost wholly from other sources. The sum of $3 million authorized to be raised by loan by an act of the last session of Congress has been obtained upon terms advantageous to the government, indicating not only an increased confidence in the faith of the nation, but the existence of a large amount of capital seeking that mode of investment at a rate of interest not exceeding 5% per annum. In December, James Monroe is re-elected, and it's virtually unopposed. I swear, as there becomes something to talk about in terms of presidential elections, it will be discussed, but there really hasn't been an election like the one from 1800 yet, where the country is divided and the race is close, but trust me, we will get there. Out of the 235 electoral votes, Monroe receives 231. 3 are not cast at all, and a single Democratic Republican from New Hampshire casts a vote for John Quincy Adams with the explicit goal of ensuring the vote is not unanimous. Now, I can't be certain as to why he didn't want the vote to be unanimous, but it does ensure that George Washington is to this day the only man unanimously elected president of these United States. Finally, on December 20th, Missouri imposes a $1 bachelor tax on unmarried men aged between 21 and 50. I've seen it claimed by some to be an old wives' tale, so I made sure to really check this out, and from the official Senate.gov website for Missouri, this law is in fact listed, and it says of the law, quote, "Single men between the ages of 21 and 50 must pay a $1 annual tax. The law was enacted in 1820, presumably to encourage more men to marry." Now, 1821 is the only year that the tax is paid, as it quite quickly faces backlash for being, quote, "unconstitutional, impolitic, partial, oppressive, and the perfection of legislative absurdity." This early attempt at social engineering becomes nothing more than an interesting footnote in Missouri history. Well, that's it for 1820. Bit of a different kind of year. There's lots of stories that kind of have varying and conflicting information this year, so in the absence of hard proof, I'd rather just omit something, or at least point out the two versions of history that are sometimes recorded. Next time, we get another new state, an update on Spain's relationship to Florida, and the publication begins on a new periodical. All that will have to wait till Monday though, so until then, do me a favor and like this video, follow the show if possible. You can find us on X at 250 Years of USA, and there's pictures to accompany every episode so far. You can send us an email, 250yearsofusa@gmail.com. This has been our story, 250 Years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.